Howdy, folks. Happy Friday. Thank God it's Friday. It's muggy here. I had an eye doctor's appointment, which is always a wonderful thing, and especially in the summer, Kev, if you have an eye doctor's appointment and they dilate your pupils, and then you have to drive home with, in direct sunlight, you're basically like driving blind. And they gave me these like temporary, like I have sunglasses, but they're not prescription sunglasses. So they basically gave me this visor that was like a sunglasses that you put over your glass. And I could see. I wouldn't have driven if I couldn't see, but it's really sort of a harrowing experience to drive in the summer with your pupils dilated. It's not the greatest feeling. But anyway, there's my rant. Go ahead, Russ.
So lately on Twitter, I've noticed a lot of posts for summer sports camps, and so I figured I'd go around the horn here and see. Like, I had a great experience one year. I went to Lutheran basketball camp. Now, again, I remember my parents saying, like, "Do you really want to go here?" And they were probably thinking, "Well, you're going to be the only Jewish guy at a Lutheran basketball camp." And as it turns out, I was one of the only two white guys at this basketball camp. But I said, yeah, I want to go. I want to get better at basketball. So I went, and it was a great experience. And then one day, Jim Balvano came in and coached a session for us. And that's something that always stayed with me. Like, that coaching session was amazing. It got me to be better just at everything, because he really was clear cut about trying your best. At that point, as a basketball player, he would say, be a rat. And it's the same thing as in hockey. Be a rat meant do everything. Steal the ball, do whatever you can, have an impact on the game. And it was great. And so I just kind of wonder, and it seems like sports camps are doing really well again. So I'll go to Kev first, because I don't know if Mike ever went. But Kev, did you ever go to a sports camp when you were a kid?
No, they didn't really have sports camps. But, in the summertime, which is when you usually have it, I was usually playing organized baseball. And we did have a very unique thing in our community of Wayne, Michigan, where once you get out of Little League, and you moved into the Babe Ruth division, which is, 13, 14 in that age, it was actually run by the high school coach. And all the teams were coached by the varsity coach and the JV coach. And so there were 6 Babe Ruth teams. They played at 10, 12, and 2 at one field. And wow. So he saw all of the teenage players. And, you played games on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and you practiced on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And so it was very unique for the high school coach, because he got to see all the players kind of coming up. But, they had 2 coaches coach all 6 teams. And I thought it was a very good way. But what I really noticed the difference was, even in the 1960s, there was zero parents, because, they can not come and watch baseball games at 10, noon, and 2. Right. So, we just played for ourselves and had a good time. It was great. So, but I don't recall even the availability of summer camps in the 1960s. I mean, they probably existed, and maybe I just didn't know.
Okay. I never went to a sports camp, and all I can say is if John Wooden had coached me, I would still suck. I was terrible at basketball.
Right. That's not the point, though. Like,
right.
He may have helped you in other ways, because he was just a guy that could motivate.
But here's I
think get better from the camp.
Here's an indication of like how bad I was at sports as a kid. I played Little League baseball. I loved baseball. In our Babe Ruth league, which I think was 10 to 12, at least that was the league that I participated in. They put all the good players on one team. And that team was of course named the Yankees. So like a friend of mine who was, high school sports, college sports, was big and tough, and he was on that team. And after like the tryout performances, I ended up on the Indians, which were the second worst team in the league. And this is how bad this team was. I was not fast, and they had me playing center field. So, and I could barely catch the ball. I got better as I got older, but my first hit, I hit with my eyes closed. I just it was, I was, always played bad. I early on could not hit. I hit a 340-foot double because I was too busy watching it and not running the bases. So
listen, I was scrawny, man. If I was 5'3", 120 pounds, whatever. And if I hit a home run, I was hitting it because I swung late. And I hit it over the outfielder's head who was playing in because he figured I wasn't going to do it. But that was the only way I could hit a home run back in those days.
I used my superior acumen to be effective at softball because I was not going to hit the ball out of the park. So what I always did was, because I was a right-handed hitter and I hit the opposite way, because every team in slow pitch softball puts their worst fielder in right field because most of the hitters are right-handed. So I hit opposite field. I always hit it down the right field line, the right field line, and I always got doubles or triples, if you can believe it, because I hit the opposite way. So
you turned homers into doubles.
Well, I would never hit a home run, Russ. The only time I ever hit a home run was the right fielder dove for it, and he went by him, and I ran around the bases and hit a home run.
I'll tell you, sometimes you get too much pressure, though. Like when I was at University of Houston, I get on campus. There's a summer baseball league, and their intramurals were really competitive. Like some of the athletes from some of the school teams would play on them too, just to keep playing. And I remember I think I was leading off for softball. First game, I hit 2 homers. They're like, "Oh, you're gonna hit a ton of homers for us," and I probably hit 2 more the rest of the season. So,
yeah, we always played. I grew up at fields. They had home run fences. Little league.
Some of mine had fences.
Yeah, always had fences. 225, I think was the little league fence, and in softball, we had fence as well. I just never had fence power. And then we moved to Virginia when I worked for USA Today, and I played. My wife is a very good athlete, like a very good athlete, and I played co-ed with her. And what made her unique is usually you try to put the men in the outfield, but my wife was a terrific center fielder. Can go get the ball and she can catch it and she can throw. So to be able to have her play in center field, but for some reason in Virginia the fences are shorter. I think we always played 300 as in Michigan was our fences. So I never could reach those. And the first time up in Virginia, I hit what I thought was a routine fly ball. And so I'm running as hard as I can around base and going to second. And the second baseman says, "Slow up," and went over the fence. So I never saw the ball go over the fence.
Yeah.
It never occurred to me. So I don't know whether they were 275 or 260.
I never hit one over the fence in Little League. I did hit it in softball about 5 years ago. Now I don't hit home runs at all.
So
a couple years ago, because I had heard that they were going to get rid of the diamond that they were going to build houses on where the diamonds were, that I hit my first hit in Little League. I went there and I marveled at how small the field looked. I'm like, I couldn't hit it into the field from home play. I couldn't believe it, but that was,
you were smaller and weaker.
Yeah, there was a field in my hometown where we played Sandlot, and my best friend was the only person who could hit it to the trees, is what we would call it.
Yeah.
He could hit it all the way into the trees. And I went there when I was an adult, and I just couldn't believe, what a short distance it was from our home plate. By the way, that home plate was still in there. We had dug a brick into it. We had a home plate in the 1960s, and in the 2000s, it was still, it was all cracked and everything, but it was still in that ground. But anyway, the trees, it was nothing. It seemed like it was such an incredible clout.
It's funny because like old Doubleday Field by Cooperstown, when they used to play games there, I was there for a Mets White Sox, and Frank Thomas hit one in the trees like he did.
Yeah. It is interesting, though, all the things that we've done in our lives that today we would not even consider as being reasonable or safe. And I had a conversation with a friend of mine. Actually, it was this morning. We were talking about going to, he would go to Fenway Park and get on the tee when he was young and do all that. When I was like 10 years old, I would get on a bus and go 40 miles down Michigan Avenue to go to a Tiger game with another 10-year-old friend. Like, we thought nothing of that.
Wow.
And now if my grandkids wanted to do that, There's no way I would allow that. You know,
I couldn't do anything till I was about 16 at that age, and then that's when I first went to Shea Stadium and had the horrific time of switching at Jamaica, which was always like a lousy neighborhood. You got to get off the train, you got to go across the street, you got to make sure you catch the other train, otherwise you're screwed. And that became a thing. But I did go with friends the first time, like my brother's friends, older ones. So
and the other thing too, tackle football.
Oh yeah, we played with those dads always.
Yeah. You played tackle football down at the Sandlot and no helmets. Yeah,
no pads, nothing.
I remember being in college and going back to my hometown on a Sunday afternoon because a bunch of people I know were going to play tackle football. Yeah. We went on the high school team, and we're 19, 20 years old. We're out there tackling.
One guy broke his leg in the game we had.
Yeah, no, I mean, I broke my arm in a Sandlot game for sure.
We didn't play tackle football in our neighborhood because the kids that I played with, they were playing high school football, and they were big, and we played two-hand touch on the street.
Yeah.
We did that too. Yeah.
So
street hockey as well, and you could tell the people who were really into it because they used the people that were really into it used that real hardcore rubber that could really open your skin.
No. Now this is the thing. Street hockey, we tried with the Milek orange puck that hurt, and I'm like, I'm a goalie. I'm not playing with that damn thing. Then we tried the orange ball, which was softer, but they couldn't shoot the slap shot fast enough because it was soft. So we ended up we used the tennis ball. Now it bounced a lot, and when it got frozen, it was harder than the ball, but it was
we used the orange puck. But it was nasty when you got
as says he used to play American handball. My dad was a handball champ in Brooklyn. Now I never played handball because it was that small black ball that really would hurt your hand even wearing a glove. But I did play with that small black ball paddle ball, and I played that through.
I'll tell you, speaking of handball, there is a sport that was so widespread in the 70s that now simply doesn't exist, and that's right.
Everywhere. Like if you went to Brooklyn on, I guess, like when my dad was a kid, and even when I was a kid, until it switched over to paddleball, you could see 10, 12 games easy just driving down the highway, just in different towns.
And when I was in college, I had a professor who actually was also involved in the hockey team, and he and I had a standing racquetball game at 6:30 in the morning every Mondays. We would just meet and play racquetball before he started teaching, and I started skipping classes.
from last thing before we start the show, from 5th grade on through college, I played in 5th grade and 6th grade. It was an intramural floor hockey, and then through high school and into college, there were floor hockey leagues, and I played. And there was always somebody else who wanted to play goal, so I was never allowed to play goal. So I played defense. And because Jim Schoenfeld at that point was a very prominent Sabre team captain, I blocked shot. I slid in front of everything, Russ. I blocked shots.
You showed actual bravery. I'm proud of you.
Oh well, I didn't take him in the face. I slid with my back towards the shot.
That's good. I don't remember blocking a shot in street hockey. I don't remember even trying to.
Oh, not in street hockey. No, unless it was ice on the road. But in floor hockey. On the gym floor.
On the gym floor you're talking about. Yeah. Well, we used to play that in gym. We'd play floor hockey, and no one had a mask, and no one had any kind of protection. No. And after a while, they outlawed it.
Well, it was in gym class. We were one of the two best teams, and this was 6th grade. So they had the entire school watch us play at the championship, and in this game, I got kicked out because I knocked a kid through the 2 gym doors. I checked them and I knocked him through the doors.
All right, I think we need to start the show.
Okay. Hello, hockey world. Today is Friday, August 5th, 2022.
I'm Russ Cohen, and on August 3rd, I saw that Oreo was putting out a pumpkin spice Oreo already, so the war is on.
Kevin Allen and real men use wooden dollies in their hockey sticks. So.
And I'm Super Goon Mike Agello, and this is the Hockey Buzzcast here on HockeyBuzz.com. Well, okay, when the trade went down, when the big trade between Florida and Calgary went down, I said, okay, this is a good deal if Calgary can get Huberdeau and Mackenzie Weegar signed. Well, they tackled the more difficult of the two yesterday, Kev, with Jonathan Huberdeau signing an 8-year max deal at $10.5 million AAV. The majority of the 8 years is signing bonus. First, is this a good signing? Second, I'll talk about the amount, but what did you think of this signing?
Oh, I mean, this is tremendous work. And, the Calgary Flames had a bad hand that they had to play. And some of it, letting Gaudreau get to where he got to and not quite understanding that he was going to leave, that's on the Flames. But the Tkachuk thing, that it wasn't on the Flames. That was just Tkachuk deciding he didn't want to play there anymore. But now what you've seen happen here is, they've lost Tkachuk and they've lost Huberdeau. And in return, they lost Tkachuk and they lost Gaudreau. And in return, they've gotten Huberdeau, who's now signed for 8 years. They have Weegar, who fits nicely into the hole they had on their defense. They've got a first-round pick. They've added a prospect who has been listed as certainly going to play in the league, not going to be a star category. They've actually done a pretty good job of recovering from what could have been a disastrous situation. And I've seen people criticize the deal because they say, boy, on that 8th year. But Huberdeau is only 1 year older than Johnny Gaudreau.
Right.
Almost exactly. Their birthdays, one's in June and one's in August. So it's really not much different than if they would have given Gaudreau an 8-year deal. And I thought they were going to have to give him $10 million to keep him. So I actually think they've got a pretty nice recovery here. Huberdeau's a good player. I think, even though this was part of the Tkachuk deal, you got to look at it in terms of replacing Gaudreau, because I think that's essentially what they're doing. So I think they've done a really nice job here. And then they've lost Tkachuk, but they got the first-round pick and Weegar and the prospect to kind of overcome that. So in terms of recovery, I think Flames have done a good job.
Yeah, this is a good signing. Hey, Tex. This is a good signing. I think that the issue is they still are going to be down points like they are. So they're going to have to play different, but Weegar will help them do that. So I think True Living has done a really nice job here. All the credit to their capologist, because, this was not an easy one to figure out. It's a lot of money in, it's a lot of money out. And no, it's a good signing.
Well, okay. I had no problem with the signing. And from what the reports are out there, this is essentially what they offered Gaudreau on an 8-year deal to stay in Calgary. I don't know if the signing bonus is different or not, but it was essentially the same amount. I think they're comparable players, so I don't have any problem with it. I think he's a really good player. The only thing I would quibble about is $10.5 million AAV is a little high for him. He's a really good player, but I think it's a little high. That might be a Calgary tax in a sense. Okay, pay me a little more. Now, maybe he would have been paid a little less in Florida because of the State Tax Act, but I thought it was a little much in terms of AAV, but they've got the cap space, so why not do it?
Yeah, I mean, he's an MVP. He was, had an MVP type season,
Top
last
5.
year.
Yeah.
And that's what you have to remember. I put a big blog, I put a story up today about, just trying to get people's opinions on who they think is better, Gaudreau or Huberdeau, and it's an interesting debate to have.
I think they're comparable. Don't you think?
They're different. They're different players, They're different
Well, in the last 5 years, I looked it up. Top scorers in the league, Huberdeau is 7th, Gaudreau is 8th, and it's not by a lot of points.
Right. So you're looking. I mean, it's a huge win for Calgary. It's an enormous win for Calgary. In my mind,
it's hard to point out a negative in this one.
Yeah, they're both top line wingers. So now, Kev, they've got they've got ex favorite for the heart, Mangiapane signed. They've got Huberdeau signed. So I think they probably would like to maybe add some offense, and maybe there's some free agents still out there that they could bring in on a 1-year deal. But they've really recovered as well as can be expected after losing their 2 best players.
Yeah, I mean, normally you don't have any opportunity to recover like they have, given the magnitude of their losses. But this is a pretty creative way to do it. And to bring in a guy, and as Russ pointed out, when you look at statistics, they're very similar type players. It doesn't matter whether they're the same style or not. It doesn't matter. But they're similar ages, as I pointed out. They're only a year apart. So I don't think that's an issue, even though I see people trying to make it an issue. Like, when did we start thinking, what is this contract going to look like in, that's the 6th year or the 7th year or the 8th year? You're trying to win now, and
right. But we've started to look at that because we've seen enough contracts age where it's really kind of ugly. And the last 2 years, the guy's barely playing.
But you have to give these guys these contracts,
I know,
in order to sign them.
It's
so
true.
So what what are you going to do? Are you going to say no? Well, then you're not going to be able to sign those players.
Right. Then he's going to walk in a year.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like you have to look at it. You're just sort of looking at the value of the contract spread over the years when they're going to be really good. So this was an $84 million contract. And is he going to be good in 6 of those years? So, you're paying him 13 million, something in that area. Well, that's he's
there through the Markstrom contract, which is an important thing.
Yeah. So, but I completely agree. I mean, I think their recovery here has been really impressive given the state they were in. And, even like I said, if you say if Gaudreau and Huberdeau, or even now what you've gotten back for Tkachuk as a 1st-round pick, a prospect who will play, won't be a star, but will play, and Weegar, who is going to help your defense now. And whether you sign him or not, that's kind of up to you. But, he's going to help in the short run.
Yeah. This is going to make it easier to sign Weegar, I think, because, again, Weegar is a high ticket, and there's a reason Florida traded it. They didn't think he was worth what he wanted to get. But this is going to make it a little bit easier, at least for him. He's sitting there saying, I'm going to Calgary, and they're doing something. They're doing something. They're going somewhere. And if you're a Calgary Flames fan, this is exciting. I mean, this is a really exciting day because you've been through a miserable summer so far, but now suddenly you have a different player now who's also a star, and it's really usually, there was no like Huberdeau going back to the Islanders when they lost Tavares. This is a big deal.
Yeah, and they got their business done. They got Shillington signed. They got Mangiapane signed. So, they're pretty. They may not be done, but they got the majority of their summer business done. They can wait on Weegar, and if Weegar decides he doesn't want to sign, then they're going to be in a playoff spot more than likely. So they might keep him and either let him walk or try to work on him to try to sign him during the season. But yeah, no, I think it didn't look good when Gaudreau left and when Tkachuk asked out. And now if you fast forwarded 3 weeks, Calgary's a lot better off than I think most people suspected. Now, other signings that are interesting, the Kaylor Yamamoto signs with Edmonton $3.1 million on a 2-year deal. Now, Russ, they still retain him. He's arbitration eligible after those 2 years.
Right.
Scored 20 goals, second line winger. I mean, he's an effective player. That's a good signing. That's a good amount.
Yeah, it's a good signing. It's the right amount for now. And they're covering themselves because if he happens to get to the 30-goal mark, which he's capable of,
right?
Whether he does or not, who knows, but he is capable. He gets there, then on that last year of negotiating, they could work out a better deal. But this is good for them because I'd say the last 2 years he's made really good strides. Like we all knew that he was really talented, but again, like a lot of their players offensively, other than Draisaitl and McDavid, they would get a little lost in the shuffle. He's emerged this year, so this is good. I mean, again, things are looking pretty good for Edmonton.
Well, Kev, you look at Edmonton, and it's. I mean, I know that like I always complain that it's too much on those 2 players, those 2 great players, and there's not enough support staff. Well, they got to the conference final because they got Kane, and he scored like crazy. They added Hyman in free agency. The Yamamoto they've developed through the system. I don't know if I would have paid Kane as much, but I understand why they did because he scored like crazy for them. But at least there's a top six there. I think the problem with Edmonton is we don't know whether there's going to be a bottom six that takes a little bit of the heat off of those top players.
Yeah, but I mean, they really have upgraded, just with the additions, Hyman and, Nugent Hopkins never gets enough credit.
Sure.
He's a good all-around player, and, he contributes as well, and Yamamoto, and, they've got a group that I think can get it done. And, I think you can find role players. You got to be thorough and effective. Nobody's proven that better than Bill Zito. Who's added guys by looking around at the minor leagues, and I think Edmonton should be able to do that, and that they can add those kind of players. You can make deals for at the trade deadline because they're usually not making a lot of money. So,
right.
And the difference between a $1 million player and a $800,000 player, you can usually just make an even trade. So
and like with Toronto, where they say if they say to people who are from the Toronto area or players looking to make an impression, you can come in and play with Matthews and Marner for a year and maybe put up and get the visibility of playing in Toronto. You won't get the visibility of playing in Edmonton, but you get the opportunity to play with McDavid and Draisaitl, and maybe that's an attractive something for a veteran like Phil Kessel, I think we mentioned before. Russ, the other big contract was Mario Ferraro signing with San Jose, a 4-year deal at $3.25 million. And I don't think this deal is possible if they don't trade Brent Burns because they didn't have the cap space, really.
Yeah, this is a good deal. This is, Ferraro's offense is starting to come around a little bit. He does a lot of good things on the ice. They got him at a reasonable rate. What this also does, though, is this keeps pushing up the rate of guys like Travis Sanheim, who is going to be due a contract next year, guys with like double the offense.
Yeah.
But, that's what this does now because, Ferraro is kind of pushing that bottom number up now. But I like the signing for San Jose, and I do like the progress that Ferraro has made.
I talked to somebody about this, and this is a question for all you guys. So I talked to somebody about this because, that is usually the case. We usually see guys assigning, like set the market, right? But in where we are with this flat cap situation, and it feels like that's not the same thing right now. Like it feels like there's a market for every team individually versus a market that goes across. Like San Jose's got cap space. They can do this. They've got, they have a lot of space to do things with. They have different situations. But just because he gets that much, a team without cap space is not necessarily going to have to like match that number with the player that they're signing, an RFA they're signing, because really, it's a difference. First of all, I mean, obviously RFAs don't have all that much leverage. And secondly, we really can't live in that era when the cap is not, when their cap space is just disappearing all the time. We are really literally looking at like a bucket that's almost empty with cap space.
The only thing I would say is on one hand, you're right. On the other hand is, though, agents are always going to use other players' numbers against the team that they're negotiating with. And what ends up happening is, like, let's just say with Sanheim, if he decides he'll sign a 2-year deal with the Flyers, the chance of him signing his next deal with the Flyers goes down drastically.
For sure.
So that's where, even if you don't have the funds and you kind of like can only come up with that kind of deal, that's where you're going to lose on the term game.
But look at a player like, go ahead, Kev.
Well, I mean, I think Russ just put that perfectly. You're right and you're wrong. The way the system is now, I mean, it's built in that comparables are essential in the league. When you do arbitrations, you don't compare to people on your own team. You compare to people around the league. And, for defensemen, like we've noted, if you have a pulse, you get 2.5 million. If you're better than have a pulse, if you can play a little bit like Ferraro, now you're over 3 million. And that's pretty consistent around the league, and that's not going to change. I mean, you can try to get players, as Boston has successfully done, to take a little less. But in the long run, as Russ points out, it will hurt you if you can't pay what is considered the standard around the league.
I mean, the surprising thing here is, and I mean, we talked about this either earlier in the week or last week about like there's no money out there. There's very little money out there, and how pricey it's going to be for teams to move out players to other teams to be able to create the cap space to sign somebody else. But even the moves that we thought were going to happen like right away, right after the beginning of the year or the beginning of the fiscal year, like the extension of Nathan McKinnon, that hasn't happened yet. Now I look at Colorado's, their books. They have $26 million in cap space for after this season, but they have 8 unrestricted free agents.
Right.
So, they can go out and say, okay, Nathan McKinnon, you're going to get $11.5 million, which you deserve because you're one of the league's best players. But then that sort of hamstrings them, Kev, where then now all of a sudden they only have $15 million and they've got to sign all these players. And how are they going to sign all of them?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's always a plan for that. Like, I think oftentimes we're too centric to this season, but I think teams look much farther down the road and try to sort that all out. I mean, because that's the nature of our beast, where we're usually talking about this season. But I want to make a point on something that Eklund said too, because it reminded me that the definition of a lot of cap space has changed dramatically. Like Eklund just threw out that the Sharks have some cap space, which is true. However, Sheng Peng just wrote a story when he points out that the Sharks now, after the Ferraro signing, have just enough to handle whatever happens to them during the regular season. That's the definition of a lot of cap space now. Like, they don't have any space to go out and bring anybody in, but if they get some minor injuries that are not long term, that can get where they've got to bring in an extra body in from the minor leagues, they've got enough cap space to handle that. And so they do have a lot of cap space, and that's the difference between now and and previously, before we got to this flat cap era, when you have a lot of cap space, that meant you have cap space to go out and get people.
Yeah, we talk about the devil sign.
Yeah, I was going to mention that. I was just going to say, and the thing that's a killer for the Sharks is that they've got over $5 million in dead cap money because of the money that they returned on Burns and the money they retained on the Martin Jones buyout. So that's a really good player that they can't use that money for 3 years on Burns, 5 years on Jones, because they had to either retain or they had to correct a mistake by buying out Jones. Now the other signing, Russ, was Miles Wood. They went to arbitration, and they settled, as happens all the time with arbitration. 1 year deal for $3.2 million. I'm a little surprised on this simply because he played, I think, 2 games last year.
Yeah,
and when he's healthy, he's a really good player, but he's not healthy. He hasn't been healthy.
Well, he wasn't healthy last year. I don't know if you could say he hasn't been healthy in his career, right? So I think I look at this and I say he's worth more to the Devils than he is a lot of other teams, because he knows the players. They know exactly where they could slot him. He's got speed. They still needed more speed. I think it's a good signing. I think you wait and see what he does this year. If he goes back and is back to the same old Miles Wood, they're gonna sign him to probably another 3-year deal after that. So I think it's smart.
Or if they can't sign him, or if he has a good year and they think he's going to go free agency, then a power forward like him, a guy with size and his ability, they can probably get a really good return at the deadline. So I mean, I get that, but I just like for a guy who didn't play a lot, didn't play hardly at all last year, that the amount was a little surprising.
It was, but he is a really good player, and if he's healthy, he's a major player for them. And he he's a top 6 guy for sure, and and they need it. They need him. I mean, they really do. Obviously, they do.
Listen, all you have to do is just think about how many points he'll score against the Flyers. He kills them.
That's true. He kills the Flyers. He does. He's speedy little guy. I put something up the other day I thought might be fun to talk about. I put something up the other day about the what was your favorite line you ever watched? And I got 120 replies on my blog for this. You're the favorite line, because I got thinking about the Gaudreau-Tkachuk line. Is obviously no longer, and that was maybe the best line in hockey last year.
Right.
But they're gone. And
so are you asking our favorite line or the best line?
I was going to say the best line. You could do either, but I think the way I posed it in my blog was the best line you ever got to see. So it doesn't mean you got to see them. Okay. I mean, I obviously I don't know like the Hal line, Hal Abel.
Production.
I never saw them play. I was never able to watch them play. But what's the best line you ever saw play? And how I sort of define in my mind, this is the way I've always defined a player if they're like the best or like a superstar line or superstar player. Is when you're super aware of when they are coming on the ice next. Like when you're watching a game and if there's a superstar out there, you're like, that Gretzky's shift is like 2 shifts from now in your head, or that this line's coming out 2 lines from now in your head, or they're out next. That's always how I define something that's really special.
Well, I would have to say the 2 best lines that stayed together for a significant amount of time that when I grew up, I mean, obviously Gillies, Trottier, and Bossy with the Islanders. That was, you had the sniping ability of Bossy, the physicality of Gillies, and Trottier was a really good 2-way center who was a great playmaker. The Triple Crown line with the Kings, Simmer, Dion, and Taylor was fantastic. And
was there ever a name for the Bossy, Trottier, Gillies line? I wondered. I was trying to find one. I couldn't find one.
Best line in hockey. That was the name.
But isn't it crazy that there was not a nickname for that line?
Yeah, they just didn't have one. I don't know why either.
And obviously locally, the French Connection was, that was Richard Martin, Perreault, and René Robert. Their impact didn't last long, but they were for like 3-4 years. They were fantastic.
Yeah, they were amazing. And I mean, I for me, I think the Gretzky, Curry, Tikkanen line, is the line that always comes to my head.
Yeah, that's a great line.
And I got to see them play in their first game together as a line in the play. Because people forget that Tikkanen's first game was in the Stanley Cup Finals as an Oiler, and it was in Philly. And they come out on the ice and they there's Gretzky, there's Curry, and there's this other guy. Like, who the hell is he? Tikkanen lined up on the other side of it, and turned out to be just an amazing, incredible line.
The funny thing is, Kev, with that line, when the Oilers started out and Curry was on the line with Gretzky, it was sort of a rotating, a revolving door of who played the left side because almost anybody could play with them. They early on it was like B.J. McDonald and Brett Callaghan and Mark Napier played for a while. They played Semenko on that line for a while. It's sort of like I don't remember Tikkanen being like a guy.
Well,
He
he wasn't a fixture because Tikkanen was too valuable as the top checker against certain matchups. Slats like when they played against the Bruins in the final, they used him against Janney, so they moved him off his line. They would move him based on who they wanted him to play against because he was such a royal pain. But I think that's a real interesting question, Ekin. I also love the Curry, Gretzky. A lot of mine are twosomes, but the one I remember best is when he was with Tikkanen. But the other Oilers line that I loved, and they were responsible for the most entertaining goal I've ever seen, was Nielsen, Anderson, and Messier. And in the 1987 final, I remember being in that great Edmonton Northlands Coliseum press box, looking down over the ice, so you could really see the plays developing. And in that game 7, when Nielsen and Anderson and Messier broke down the ice, and when they hit the opposing blue line, I think Messier was at about Mach 3, and Nielsen was flying, and it was just going in. It was bing, bing, bing. It was in the net. I still remember that goal and just the kind of eruption and how exciting it was and how quickly they went. But if it's
part of me died at that moment, Kevin. That was like,
it was an incredible goal, and it was. It may have been. A lot of people talk about the Paul Kariya where Hockey Night in Canada timed him about how quickly he moved down the ice, and he may have had the fastest trip down the ice ever. If everyone remembers that goal,
in 2003.
I think so. It's I don't remember exactly, but I just remember it was a big deal. They slowed it down and they timed everything. But I think that goal in real time was the fastest goal I ever saw. Although for the life of me now, I've lost over time who actually scored the goal. Was it Anderson?
I think it was Messier. Or was it? Oh gosh.
Was it Messier? It's just over time. I've lost it. I just have lost.
It was Anderson. I think it was Anderson. It was on Hextall.
I
Anderson scored a lot of big ones. So
I can still see it. It went through Hextall's legs. It was a hard shot.
But it was just the speed of the goal.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it was crazy. I mean, at that time, people sort of forget that line you're talking about was probably the second best line in hockey. Like they had probably the two best lines in hockey on that team.
Yeah, I mean, it was incredible. But the other line, again, you romanticize it because I was a kid. Is I saw production line 2,
right?
So DeVecchio, Howe, and Mahavlich.
Okay.
When there was an anticipation for that, I also, was able to see the tail end of and cover them, the Islanders with Bossy and Gillies and so forth. But, one of the lines that I remember the most, and they weren't like a great scoring line, was the grind line in Detroit. Draper and McCarty and Maltby. And
my dad loved that line.
When it was their time, there was a real sense of anticipation. Like you'd look over and you could see them, you see a batter adjusting his gloves before he gets in the batter's box. Like if you would look over on the Red Wings bench, you would see them, like tugging on their gloves a little bit, getting ready and getting their shoulder pads right. It was like they were hitting the beach at Iwo Jima, just the preparation to get ready, like they were going into battle. And that line could create so much energy that it was really kind of hard to fathom. Draper could just fly around the ice and bounce off people and everything. So they were they may be the line that I remember most that created a whole lot of stuff without having an incredible amount of talent. I mean, they could play obviously, or they wouldn't have been a thing. But I remember that.
Yeah, it also meant a lot to Detroit at the time, right? Because I mean, having growing up, and my dad was just a diehard Red Wings fan, and so I listened to these games on the radio. We would get the radio feed barely out of Detroit, but we'd get it. And he loved that line too, because that was coming out of like a dark era for Detroit before they really were good again too. And that if I remember right, Kevin, is that true that they were the one that sort of like brought them?
Well, yeah, I mean they came out of the Dead Wings era, and then they became like a tough team when they had Probert and Kosher, and but they had Jacques Demers was the coach, and they weren't nearly as talented enough to compete against the Oilers.
Right.
And Yzerman wasn't enough. Like, he had 150 some points there, but it just wasn't enough. And actually, and one of the great interesting elements, he was actually sort of blamed for the Red Wings' failures. Like, he wasn't exalted. And then there was discussion about trading to Ottawa, and it's almost like everybody woke up on a Tuesday in Detroit and said, well, wait a minute.
Yeah,
you can trade our Steve Yzerman. He's ours. Well, the week before they had been blaming him for, the fact that the Red Wings couldn't go farther. So,
well, they I mean, okay, in the minds of Detroit fans, they choked 2 years in a row. They lost to Toronto in the famous Game 7, Nicky Borashevsky overtime goal in '93, and then they lost to San Jose in '94. The Sandis Ozolinch, I think it was overtime goal in Game 7. So they lost 2 years in a row, and that was when the whole questioning. But then that was when they hired Bowman, right, Kev? Because '95 made the Cup final. So
they were right on the edge.
I'm going to go with the gag line. It's an easy one because I grew up with it. Gilbert, Rattel, and Hatfield. Hatfield scored 50 goals, but he also would elbow you in the face. Rattel could score or set up the play. So one year he had like 46 goals, but he also could get 100 points. And so he was able to do that. And Gilbert did everything. And Gilbert, all those guys could skate. And, Hatfield not as good as the other two. And it was a balanced line. And 72, they could have won it all. But, Rattel broke his ankle, and that was a big deal. But they were a top team with that line. The amount of production that line gave was incredible.
It was Messier that scored that goal, 7:45 of the first period from Nielsen and Anderson. I just looked up the box.
Okay, there.
That's a great one, Russ. I remember them, very vaguely because I was pretty young. But
Yeah, when Terrell had the hair that never moved. You had
Yeah,
the
I remember.
clean hair.
I mean, my Rangers, like my Rangers memory really kind of starts around like the Thomas Sandstrom, Ron Duguay,
Oh, okay. So
Tom Laidlaw Rangers.
Yeah.
That Ranger team was sort of where my Ranger memory sort of starts. But I
Sandstrom
also have to throw out,
he was pretty
of course, the Legion of Doom line, like which I think playing in that area, like someone put up that they had 258 points one year in like a clutch and grab era still, like before we still had 2-line pass. People had Lindros and Leclerc had people hanging all over them all the time. I can't imagine if they had tightened the rules, where you couldn't like cook, you couldn't grab and stuff like that, what that line could have done, because they really were more dominant. I mean, I got to see them a lot, of course, being here in Philly, but the times that they dominated, when they were dominating a game, they were absolutely dominating.
Yeah, they were great in '97 until they played Detroit.
Ironically, the best Leaf line that I saw was probably when I was 10 or 11, which was Tiger Williams, Darryl Sittler, and Lanny McDonald. That Sittler-McDonald combo was phenomenal. Of course, it got broken up by Harold Ballard and Punch Imlach with their sort of their revenge against the Allen Eagleson and the Union and all this stuff that happened in Toronto in the late 70s. But Marner and Matthews have an opportunity to probably be the best line in Leaf history, because Matt Sundin never had really good line mates. It was always Sundin with a couple like Jonas Hoagland or Steve Thomas, or his best line mate was Alexander McGillney when he was almost over the hill. And sometimes he had Gary Roberts on his line, but he never really had great line mates. So Matthews and Marner, they could break all the records in terms of offense when it comes to the Leafs.
And they're they feel like another duo, like Gretzky and Curry, like Lemieux and Yager too, which is another one that has to be thrown out there. Like Lemieux, Yager,
Kevin Stevens for a while.
Stevens was the most, but also had Rob Brown was part of that. Remember, Rob Brown had a time on that line, but whoever played on that line, did very well, obviously. But I mean, imagine
Warren Young and Mario Lemieux.
Warren Young struck it big in Detroit, didn't he, Kev, on a free agent deal?
I'll give you another good line too. When Herb Brooks was the coach of the Rangers, the Smurf line, he had two of his guys. He had McClanahan and Mark Pavlich, the late Mark Pavlich, and Anders Hedberg was actually on that line too. And they were great, man. I mean, again, that was in an era where everybody was killing Herb Brooks for having small guys. And he's like, listen, these are my guys. They'll outwork you. They'll outskate you. Yeah. And for a lot of times they did.
I wouldn't call that line great. I would call it entertaining. That was an entertaining line. Very entertaining line. Yeah.
It was so much fun though, having two of those guys from the Miracle on Ice team playing together. That was really fun. Any of the Miracle on Ice guys' entrance to the NHL is another story we should talk about at some point, like how they each entered the NHL, because it was a fascinating way to go to do that too. Like I got to see Jim Craig's first game I got to see as a Flame in Philly. He played actually, and it was just interesting. It was really like a great moment for me, like at that time, to be able to see that game.
Mark Johnson had told me the story multiple times of prior to the Olympics, he was offered a 3-way contract. Like those existed back then, where you got one amount of money if you ended up in the lowest minor league, and then a little bit higher if you were going to the American League or the I can't remember what it was at that point. And then it was the NHL team. And then after the Olympics, he got a 1-way contract to that.
That's perfect. Yeah, they were really that. We really should. I know we're coming up on another anniversary for that, so we'll have to do that at some point. But
I will say, in today's age, we don't name lines enough anymore. Nicknames for lines are kind of going away.
I agree. What was the last nickname line? I mean, I'm guessing. I guess it's the Pasternak line, right? Like, I guess they're basically.
Yeah, the perfection line.
The perfection line is the big one. The Rangers for a short time last year had the kid line, but you don't really get many line names anymore.
A lot of teams have had kid lines, though. Like
they do.
Part of the problem is we don't have the consistency in lines anymore, because most coaches feel they want to mix them up to keep people on their toes and to give them chemistry with the multiple players on the team. And, and there's so much pressure on teams not to before, I think in the old days, you could experiment for 3 or 4 games with a line and it not cost you the season. And now points are so I mean, how many lines actually stick together?
Sure.
It's so true, and it really is it is kind of crazy that the way coaches are now, especially especially in this era, like you say, of good players leaving. You can't get 3 guys to stay on the same team for 3 years. So it's really hard enough to do that. But even in a single year, we had there were single year lines too. There were like before Lindros's Legion of Doom, it was the Crazy Eights, in Philadelphia, which was Lindros,
Brent Fedek,
and Mark Recchi.
Yeah.
88, 8, and 18. And they were always back to the high speed line with Ken Linsman and all those different things way back. Interesting. We always seemed in Philly, we always had lines
Philly named lines more than most cities.
Well, Philly's best line forever was Barber, Clark, and Leach. I mean,
the LCB line, it was called, right?
Yeah.
The LCB line, and
LCB line.
Yeah, and that was called. Yeah, that was that too. So yeah, there was something about that, and Mike, playing Stratomatic. Remember, you always had to put these guys together, even though in Stratomatic it didn't necessarily make any sense to. But it was the chemistry of it. You'd think that somehow magical chemistry would go into card game. That you had to play them together.
You couldn't put the Triple Crown line together because Simmer and Dion were the worst rated defensively in the league.
Right.
There were ones on defense. So if you put that line together, it was all or nothing. You were either going to get scored against or you were going to score.
And that used to happen, I think, with some of the Oilers players too. Remember Anderson?
Gretzky always was a worse, which he never got the best defense. He was always the worst defensive rating. And the thing is, and I was always critical of Gretzky for obvious reasons. But the thing is, his defense,
not really obvious, but
it really isn't obvious.
his defensive rating should have been the highest simply because he had the puck all the time.
It's really true. That is true. I mean, absolutely, it should have been a 4 defense like they would say back then, which was the best in the Stratomatic. He should have, because he would take, they would always have the puck. You weren't thinking about scoring when Gretzky was out there. You were really just simply trying to survive it.
But yet Messier was the best defensive rating.
Yeah, but he was, of course, incredible defensively too. And
not back then. He was, he was just as offensive as the other guys.
I feel like some of the big lines are made in the playoffs too. I feel like we've seen some of the big lines have come about in the playoffs over the years. And they're short-lived, but. Still,
but at least they stick together during the playoffs.
Right. At least they stick together.
You don't experiment with lines very often in the playoffs unless you're trailing in a series. So
right.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And it's interesting to me, why we don't see this, because there was definitely, I remember the intimidation of going against the top line. When you're watching them come on the ice together, was tough. It was really something. With that Trache, Bossy,
But
when they came on the ice, that was a big deal. It was very different if any one of them was not in the lineup, even though you still had these great players out there.
Haven't we noticed a change in the game? Because if you remember, I remember when Boston was playing Edmonton in the Stanley Cup final, they put Steve Kasper against Gretzky. They always put the checking center. Nowadays, it seems to me it's head to head. Like Matthews was going against the Stamkos line.
Because most players are better defensively all around.
Yeah, maybe, but I also think
sure, right.
I also think it's go ahead. Good.
Well, they've all been going to checking school since they're 7 years old. You know what I mean? And everybody's well schooled, and so you don't want to play. In the old days, you didn't mind playing a Jan Eriksson, 16, 17, 18 minutes because he could shut down the other. Well, now you wouldn't dream of playing a checker that many minutes because, and most top players have had to learn to be better defensively. So
it's really interesting you say that, because the other day when I wrote my Edmonton versus Toronto article, I found a picture. I'm looking for a picture of Matthews, of Matthews and McDavid, trying to find a picture of them together so I could post it as a picture. And I found a picture of McDavid going in and Matthews defending him, and you can see Matthews is looking at his chest. He's in the perfect position. He's doing all the things that you're taught to do. He is absolutely defending McDavid like you've been taught to defend him, and that's something that, you're right. These guys just are so schooled, and the training is so solid that they're not just trying to outscore the other player all the time. We saw a little bit of, we got to see McDavid versus McKinnon.
I just interviewed a prospect recently, and he was talking about that, and his quote was something to the effect is, I'm on the defensive side of the puck almost all the time. I'm really proud of that. And you never would have heard a prospect talking about that.
Even when I started, no way. I didn't hear that for like 10 years.
I'm really proud of that. That was his quote.
Yeah.
I'm almost always on the defense.
That's coaches drumming it into him. That's what that is.
That's a coach's dream. That statement is a coach's dream.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, in the comment thread on this podcast and YouTube, feel free to put your favorite line. And let us know.
Actually, Goalie FP has one that I covered the check line for the Rangers. And yeah, it was Peter Nedved, Jan Hlavik, and I think it was Radek Dvorak was the other one. And they were a fun line on a bad team. Like, they actually produced. And that Nedved really produced that year, too. And Jan Hlavik probably had about 30 goals, probably his best year. On a really awful team, that was a fun line.
See, okay, I like that. That's another one that we could do going forward. Is like not the best line, but your sort of your favorite. And it didn't have to be for the Leafs back in the, I'd say, early '80s. There was a line with Walt Podubny, Peter Inachek, who was a Flyers draft pick that was traded to the Leafs from the Flyers,
right?
And Miroslav Fricher, and they were really entertaining. They weren't very good, but they were entertaining.
Oh yeah, I mean, we get and I think the line it just similar to the line that we saw broken up in Tampa with all the players who had to go, had to be traded away or were signed elsewhere. That was another one of those lines that was like that, super entertaining.
I can't count any line with Jágr and Straka because I was thinking about it in my head. He had that on like 3 different teams. Jágr made sure Straka was with him. So it's like
they did call it the check line in Pittsburgh as well, though. And I remember being in Pittsburgh and
John Herdino was the other one.
I was walking around the basement of the Igloo last year before they closed the Igloo down and moved to the new building. And we had a playoff game and I was walking around the basement of the Igloo and I saw a sign that was like hidden behind something else. That was like a poster from a promotional days that had written on it the check line and had Jágr and Straka and somebody, and they were actually like, it was a poster that they had given out at one point, I think, to their fans.
Jan Herdino was the third guy.
That's why the Ranger one was a little different because they were called the checkmates. At least they made it like less generic.
I see. That's a good way of doing it.
There was a copyright on the check line. So.
And all those Montreal Canadiens lines, Koreans in our chat room. I mean, there's obviously incredible Montreal Canadiens lines. The Flying Frenchman what line was that? That one I always forget.
Well, there was shot Lemaire and Lafleur was the big line.
That was the big that was the big.
Whatever line had Cornway, that was the fast line, the speed line.
Yeah, and obviously, gosh, I mean they had some incredible lines. As did
whatever
Boston.
Whatever line Gilbert Dion was on in '93.
right, there you go. Yeah, so it's kind of fun things. So let us know in the chat room what you think of that, and or in the comments. The other thing I'm working on right now is if you want to think about this for the future too. I'm working on an idea of fan favorites, and we talked a little bit what you're talking about, Mike, but not just lines, but just players who were fan favorites that weren't necessarily the best players, but were absolutely fan favorites. In certain because those definitely exist and they have existed forever, and some of them are really good, but some of them aren't. Some of them are just. And it's always fascinating when we talk about a player getting traded and he was a fan favorite. We heard about that a lot. Oh yeah, he got traded, but he's a real Huberdeau is a pretty big fan favorite in Florida. That's actually a big deal. Him leaving Florida in that trade. He among Florida fans, he was one of those guys. So but we'll talk more about that as we go. But for now, folks, thanks again for watching. Remember, without the buzz, it is just hockey, and have yourself a fantastic